With 32 teams in the NFL, there are bound to be teams in different stages of competing. Some teams are in win-now mode and are doing everything they can to play in San Francisco next February for a chance to call themselves Super Bowl champions. But not every team is in win-now mode, nor are they close to winning a Super Bowl. And in today's video, we're going to discuss 4 of my least favorite situations in the NFL as we enter the 2025 season. We're going to discuss how each team got here, what their 2025 season will look like, what their near future will look like, and a whole lot more. One key thing to remember before we discuss each team in today's video is this does not mean they're doomed, that they might as well start planning for the 2026 draft, because that is certainly not the case either, and you never know in today's NFL. But there is a lot to break down, and if you could like the video before we start, I'd really appreciate it, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video with the New York Giants. Admittedly, the Giants may be a surprise because I think you can legitimately make the argument they are one of the most improved teams from 2024 to 2025, and I don't think anybody would push back. They did well in both free agency and the draft, and they had 3 top 100 selections that should all see the field and make a noticeable impact. The first, of course, was Penn State pass rusher Abdul Carter, who I thought was the best player in the draft, and when we talk about setting guys up for success, like a receiver going to Buffalo, or a running back going to run behind Philly, or Detroit's offensive line, for example, Abdul Carter going to the Giants is in that same ballpark. Him going to the Giants to get after the quarterback alongside Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, and even having Kayvon Thibodeau and Darius Alexander as a 4th and 5th option is a great defensive line, truly. And in free agency, they brought in guys like Paulson Adebo and Javon Holland to help out the secondary, and Chauncey Golston from the Cowboys to also help the pass rush, and you're looking at a much improved defense. A defense that finished 21st in points allowed in 2024, as well as 28th in turnovers forced, both of which should improve in 2025, and especially the turnovers forced, as it's hard to go back-to-back years forcing just 15 turnovers in 17 games the way the Giants did last year. But one of the biggest reasons why the Giants are included in today's video is because of the division they play in. Obviously, this is nobody's fault in particular, but I don't look at this team and definitively think they are going into Philly, Washington, or Dallas and winning with a big game on the line. And when we start the team preview series in a couple of weeks, that's going to be my biggest concern, not just with the Giants, but with several other teams too. And again, I go back to the fact I think the Giants are a significantly improved team from where they were 6 months ago, and really credit Joe Shane for the offseason he put together. But for anyone who does not know, the Giants' schedule this year is absolutely brutal. They start the year with back-to-back road division games at Washington and at Dallas, then come home to play the Chiefs and Chargers, and that would be a tough start for anyone, let alone a team coming off of a year in which they went 3-14 and had the number 3 pick in the draft. I think there's a very real possibility they start out 1-3 or 0-4, and the Jackson Dart selection was kind of tough because they had to draft a quarterback at some point during the Shane and Dable era, and unfortunately for them, at least in the long run, they beat the Colts in Week 17 last year to win them out of drafting Cam Ward. Now, if Michael Penix, JJ McCarthy, or Bo Nix end up being stars, I don't want to get into revisionist history and say, well, they should have taken one of those guys because they were available when Malik Nabers was on the clock at pick 6, and Malik Nabers is going to be a great player for a long time, and he had over 1,200 yards in his rookie year, so it's really hard to criticize that pick. As long as he has average quarterback play, I really think he has all-pro potential and should be a 1,300 or 1,400 yard player consistently. But I really worry about the 2025 Giants offense not having enough firepower to keep up with their opponents, and that's a shame because, again, how much of an improved team they are from last year to this year. And even if they win 7 or 8 games this year, we'd be talking about Brian Dable having a 17-34 record over his previous 3 years, and obviously the Giants can say what they want, but I'd be very surprised if they kept Dable after that. And then we'd enter 2026 in Jackson Dart's second year with a new head coach and effectively a new offense in his second season, and you get the point of where this ship would be headed. And despite being of the most improved teams this offseason, I think this situation specifically is brutal entering the 2025 season. Next up is the Indianapolis Colts, and they were in the news recently because third-year quarterback Anthony Richardson left practice due to shoulder soreness, which was also in the same shoulder that was surgically repaired a couple of years ago. I don't think this is that big of a deal in the grand scheme of things, mainly because NFL insider Tom Pelissero said, quote, AR will 1000% be ready by training camp in July, end quote. Now, if he misses a couple of practices and OTAs in May or misses minicamp in June, as long as he is ready by July and is out there at training camp getting reps and getting practice, which is ultimately what AR needs, that is what matters most. And also, per head coach Shane Steichen and ESPN NFL insider Jeremy Fowler, Richardson's shoulder soreness came from having too many reps on that repaired shoulder during the spring and ultimately OTAs, which I would honestly argue is a good thing, because this is a player that, whether you are the biggest AR supporter or the biggest AR hater, you would acknowledge that AR needs repetition. He needs as many reps as he can get with, whether it's Adonai Mitchell, Alec Pierce, Josh Downs, or Michael Pittman. He needs as many reps as he possibly can, so for his shoulder to be sore because he's been putting in that much work, again, I would argue is a good thing. Of course, you want everybody to be injury-free, but to get to this point is a positive from where we were 9 months ago when AR, of course, checked out of a game. Now, again, Indy does not make today's video just because a player's shoulder is sore, and unfortunately for Indy, this was terrible timing because it is the NFL dead period, and given where Anthony Richardson is in his NFL career and how his success is more or less tied to Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen's job beyond the 2025 season, obviously that is going to be major news nationally, and that everybody's going to have an input on this and how they knew that Anthony Richardson was going to be a bust from the start and everything else. But the Colts make today's video because when you look around the AFC South, I do not think it is an exaggeration to say the Colts' future at this specific point in time looks the bleakest. The Texans, of course, are back-to-back division champions. They have their franchise quarterback, their franchise pass rusher, and they have a good head coach in DeMeco Ryans. The Jags right now are not in the best of situations, but I think you can realistically talk yourself into their future looking considerably bright because of the success that the Bucs had last year under Liam Cohen, and given that Trevor Lawrence will have Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter to throw the ball to for not just this year, but for what should be the next 4, 5, or 6 years as well. Now, I don't want to get into the Trevor Lawrence conversation because that could be a 10-minute side conversation about how the Jags set him up to fail in 2021 and how Trevor had a good year in 2022 and has not been good since, and especially in the past 15 to 20 games, really since they started 8-3 in 2023. But the point is, I think the Jags' future is a lot brighter at this specific point in time than Indy's, and even Tennessee's too, as I trust Cam Ward more moving forward than I do Anthony Richardson at this point. But one of the other reasons that the Colts are in today's video is due in some part to Daniel Jones. Now, I think there is a bit of a misconception as to who Daniel Jones is. I don't think Daniel Jones is in the top 4, 5, or 6 quarterback conversation, obviously, but I think there's some people that kind of look at Daniel Jones and more or less the internet trolls think that it's LOL Daniel Jones and that he's going to throw for 15 interceptions in the first 7 or 8 weeks of the year and that the Colts are going to lose every game by double digits. But the Colts last year finished the year 8-9 with 20 passes thrown by their quarterbacks to 19 interceptions. They were 17th in offensive points per game, and obviously you can do this with every team, not just the Colts. But there's 2 or 3 games that if they could have back, we're talking about a team that finishes 11-6 and makes the playoffs with below average quarterback play, specifically one of those quarterbacks completing just 47.7% of his passes. Daniel Jones' situation last year in New York, outside of throwing to Malik Neighbors, was bad, especially after Andrew Thomas went down, and once Andrew Thomas went down, the rest of the Giants' offensive line in 2024 was made up of a lot of guys that you probably haven't heard of, and whether the quarterback for the 2024 Giants, really outside of the one game Drew Lock had, ironically against the Colts, well, pretty much every other quarterback would have failed in that situation and or not lived up to the expectations that they have placed on themselves over the course of their career. All of this to say, unless we have a completely different Anthony Richardson than what we've seen from the first couple of years, and he has 35 plus total touchdowns and saves both Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen's job, that I think we're going to see a lot more Daniel Jones than you expect in 2025, and inevitably the Colts are going to win more games than you think. They played the NFC North last year, meaning they played the Packers, Vikings, and Lions, and not surprisingly lost to all 3 teams, and I think they're going to have a bit of an easier schedule this year, which in theory should result in more wins. And inevitably, I think they're going to win anywhere from 7 to 9 games, miss the playoffs, or if they do make the playoffs as a 7 seed and get bounced in the wild card round, get fired in GM Chris Ballard and Shane Steichen's case, and set up the new regime for an 11th to 15th or maybe 17th or 18th overall selection for a loaded quarterback class that they're going to have to sacrifice a lot of draft capital to potentially move up to go get their guy to try and compete in the loaded AFC in the future. And that is the biggest reason as to why the Colts make today's video. Next up is the New Orleans Saints. Now, a couple of things need to be prefaced here with the Saints because I really like some of the moves the Saints made this offseason, and ultimately where I think this franchise could be headed, but that's a big if at this point, and there's a lot that has to happen before we get there. Given Marshawn Lattimore was aging and had been there since 2017, I really liked the Saints trading him last year and getting what they could for him. It wasn't a perfect process, but anytime a team knows they are not seriously competing, and for reference, the Saints were 2-7 when they made the Lattimore trade, by all means, get what you can for the player, wish him well, and move on. I also really like the Saints selecting Texas offensive tackle Kelvin Banks with the 9th overall pick in the 2025 draft, and think they will have a good tackle duo of the future in Banks and 2024 first-round pick Talisi Fuaga. I had both players in my top 15 of each respective draft class. But right now, I think there's a lot to be desired for really the rest of the offense and a lot of the defense too. I also think there's this underlying belief that the Saints are going to be bad or not a great team in 2025, and it'll be okay because Kellen Moore will be able to get his feet wet in year 1 and build on this in year 2. Not only that, but for anyone who does not know, the 2026 quarterback draft class is loaded, and I also think there's this belief that's definitely thought about but not really mentioned, that if Tyler Shuck doesn't work out, it's completely fine because they'll draft one of Lenora Sellers, Garrett Nussmeier, Cade Klubnik, or Drew Aller, and they will be the next Saints franchise quarterback, and everything will be fine after that. I didn't mention Arch Manning because there's a very good possibility he returns to Texas for another year, but the point is, I don't like where this franchise is today, and honestly it has nothing to do with Derek Carr not being their quarterback this year, because I didn't like where this franchise was prior to him retiring either. I think they've done a couple of good things right, like prioritizing the offensive line the way they have over the past few years, and credit to Mickey Loomis for doing so, but I look at this offense and question how many teams they are going to be able to legitimately outscore in 2025 over the course of a 60-minute football game. Now, one thing I do want to mention is having Eric McCoy for the entirety of the year, as he is a really underappreciated player nationally, and he missed some time in 2024, which certainly affected their offense. Now, we've talked about this countless times on the channel, but you can't openly tank in the NFL. You can't go up to Cam Jordan at 36 years old and say, hey Cam, can you purposely miss a few tackles or purposefully hit the wrong gap so we have a better shot at winning after you retire. I also question this team's defense with Brandon Staley as the team's defensive coordinator, and I don't think this team wins more than 7 games this year. Obviously, every team can't win 12 or 13 games, but I also don't think this team has a lot of young talent either, to the point where I am legitimately excited about their future. I obviously wish the best for receiver Chris Olave, but there are reasons to be concerned about him in the long run, and the receiving core is very thin after Olave, and I think there are more questions than answer at this point in time with New Orleans. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this team had the number 1 pick in 2026, because remember, Tyler Shuck and Spencer Rattler are projects at best at this point in time, and one thing I also worry about with the Saints is this division isn't strong. They don't have Baltimore or Cincinnati in their division who can put up 30 points in any half of football like the Browns have to worry about. The Saints went 2-4 in the division last year, and you never know with the NFC South. While I like Carolina and Atlanta's future, I wouldn't be surprised if the Saints split games with each team just like they did last year. And with the Saints right now, I think there's a belief where they're heading into 2025 with a mindset of whatever happens, happens, and even if we don't do good, we'll still have a top 2 or 3 pick in the 2026 draft and get our quarterback of the future. But this roster is very thin and not to mention old at a lot of positions too, and I really don't like the position the New Orleans Saints are currently in. Next up is the Cleveland Browns, and they're in today's video for one big reason, and despite all of the trouble that Deshaun Watson has caused this franchise over the past couple of years, it doesn't have anything to do with him. And I'm not going to mention Deshaun Watson in today's video, aside from the fact that his contract at this point should be basically viewed as a tax, where if the salary cap is $280 million, let's take his $20 or $40 or $45 million cap hit, toss it aside because we are not going to have any meaningful contribution from him as a player for this organization, and the rest is what we have to work with. And I will say positively for Browns fans that are getting out of the Deshaun Watson contract as time goes on, that with Amazon Prime, with Peacock, with Netflix, with YouTube, all of these platforms getting NFL games generates more money for the league, and in turn pushes the salary cap up every single year. So the further we go along in the timeline, the less impact Deshaun Watson's contract has. If he was owed $40 million in 2024, then that $40 million in 2024 is significantly less than $40 million in 2027 pertaining to the Browns salary cap purposes. Now, why the Browns make today's video is because I have a lot of questions around their offense. Whether it's Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Shedeur Sanders, Dylan Gabriel, I don't think any of these guys are going to be the long-term answer, and especially not Joe Flacco, given that he was drafted all the way back in 2008. I'll be honest, I think Shedeur Sanders gives this team the best chance to win week in and week out, though I do think Joe Flacco will start the first 3 or 4 games of the 2025 season. But whether the quarterback is Joe Flacco, Shedeur Sanders, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, even Lamar Jackson or Joe Burrow, I really question this team's ceiling. I also don't think the offensive line is all that good, and they're also aging and also consistently injured, and that's not a good recipe for a successful team, and inevitably a team that I think has a very limited ceiling in 2025. Credit where it's due, Jerry Jeudy had a really good 2024 season, and I think he will be here to stay personally, but outside of Jeudy, there's a lot of questions. Cedric Tillman has flashes where he can be a legit wide receiver too, but then he'll have 4 or 5 games where he has 100 yards total. Not 100 yards in each game, but 100 yards total, where he'll have a 3 for 24 stat line in 3 weeks straight. Deontay Johnson, to me, is a player that I think is on his way out of the league, and there's a reason that he's been on 3 or 4 teams over the past year and a half, and I also think there's an attitude issue there too that I don't think will be good if this team starts to lose, which unfortunately I think they will. Jamari Thrash and David Bell to me are kind of 6 of one, half dozen of another. I don't think either player can legitimately be counted on, though I would certainly welcome being wrong. And when you look at the Browns receiving core in 2025 outside of Jerry Jeudy, I don't think there's a guy where you can say, hey, it's 3rd and 7, we need to play, it's hell or high water, who are we going to throw the football to? Now, it would be disingenuous to not include David Njoku and Harold Phantom within that conversation from a receiving room standpoint, as obviously each player, and specifically Njoku, should have a big impact on the 2025 Browns, but the question that I have, whether it's Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Shedeur, Dylan Gabriel, whoever quarterbacks this team this year, is it going to be enough to win 8, 9, 10 games? And ultimately, I think the answer is no. And at that point, I really question the future of Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry in Cleveland. Now, I do want to credit Andrew Berry for drafting both Quinshad Judkins and Dylan Sampson. I think that was a big step in the right direction, but I do worry and wonder whether or not he'll be able to stick around and see those guys develop the way that they should over the next couple of years. Another concern I have with the Browns that will inevitably have to be addressed at some point within the 2026 offseason is the future of this offensive line. Joel Bitonio, Wyatt Teller, Jack Conklin are all getting old, and especially Bitonio, as he was drafted all the way back in 2014, and I really worry about the future of this offensive line because they're going to have to replace not just one, but seemingly multiple guys in one offseason. Not only will you have to replace not just one, but multiple offensive linemen in a very short span, but you're probably also going to have another first-round quarterback in the near future too. Cleveland has 2 first-round picks, and I do want to credit Andrew Berry for receiving another first-round pick for moving back just 3 spots with the Jags in a big draft day trade so they could go up and get Travis Hunter, but we're probably looking at a future where the Browns draft a quarterback in the first round in 2026 because there's going to be several there for them. I don't think this team's ceiling is very high this year, and what's also not a problem, but just a reality, is this team is going to have to face Lamar Jackson and Joe Burrow for not just the next 2 or 3 years, but probably the next 6 or 7. Those guys are not going anywhere, and I don't envy the position that Andrew Berry, Kevin Stefanski, or the next general manager and head coach duo are in, and that's a large reason as to why the Browns are in today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as it helps the channel tremendously, and we are also closing in on 200,000 subscribers. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.